The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and bad decisions. I was elbow deep in a chest trauma when my phone buzzed in my scrub pocket for the fourth time. I ignored it. I always ignored it during a shift. That's the job. You don't get to be distracted when someone's heart is deciding whether or not it wants to keep going. But when I finally stepped into the hallway at 11:47 p.m. and checked the screen, all 4 missed calls were from the same number. My stepmother, Renee, she never called me, not once in 11 years. I called back. She picked up on the first ring. "Your father had a stroke," she said. No hello. No how are you, just that flat and clinical, like she was reading from a script. "The doctors say it's significant, you should come. Not we need you, not he's asking for you. Just you should come, the way you'd remind someone to bring a dish to a potluck." I stood in that hallway under the fluorescent lights, still in my trauma gloves, and felt something cold settle into my chest. Not grief exactly, something older than that. The particular ache of realizing you've been waiting for a call that, now that it's finally come, doesn't feel the way you always imagined it would. My name is Dr. Elliot Hayes. I'm 32 years old. I'm an emergency medicine attending at Mercy General in Denver, Colorado. I've worked 60-hour weeks, lost patients I shouldn't have lost, and saved a few I thought were already gone. I know how to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart. But the drive to Colorado Springs the next morning, through the thin gray light of a February dawn, was the longest 2 hours of my life. My father, Congressman Gerald Hayes, was the kind of man who took up space even when he wasn't in the room. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, the sort of handshake that made people feel like they'd been chosen for something. He'd served 3 terms in the House, sat on 2 committees, and had his name on a veterans' health care bill that actually passed. In Broadmoor, the neighborhood where I grew up, people treated him like he was made of something better than regular human material. I just treated him like my dad, which was, apparently, the problem. My mother died when I was 9. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, diagnosed in January, gone by October. I don't talk about that part much because it still lives in me in a way I haven't fully figured out how to hold. What I can tell you is that afterward, my father put everything he had into his work, and his work did not leave much room for a grieving 4th grader who cried too loud and needed too much. His assistant, Renee, handled the logistics of me. School pickups, doctor appointments, the permission slips he never remembered to sign. She was efficient and not unkind. But she made it clear, not with words, just with the particular quality of her attention, that I was a task to be managed rather than a person to be loved. When I was 15, my father married her. Renee had 2 daughters from her first marriage. Simone, 22, and already polished, pre-law at Georgetown, and Lily, 18, fragile and pretty in a way that made adults want to protect her from everything, including honesty. Overnight, their photos went up on the mantle in the living room. Overnight, the dining table rearranged itself so there was a chair missing on my side. I'm not saying it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that teaches you to stop asking. I stopped asking. I went to CU Boulder on a partial scholarship, worked 30 hours a week at a coffee shop off Pearl Street, graduated early. Went to med school at Northwestern on a combination of loans and stubbornness. Did my residency in Denver, stayed, made a life. A real one, built with my own hands. My father came to my medical school graduation. He sat in the front row in a navy blazer and shook my hand afterward on the steps and said, "I always knew you'd do something like this." Like I had done it as a natural extension of him, rather than in spite of everything. I smiled and didn't correct him. I was good at that by then. The house in Broadmoor looked smaller than I remembered. The garden was immaculate, which meant Renee had kept the service. The driveway held her white Lexus and Simone's rental car and a catering van for reasons I couldn't imagine, since someone was supposedly in the middle of a medical crisis. Renee met me at the door in a silk blouse and pearls. It was 9 in the morning. "He's resting," she said, eyes moving over my North Face jacket and worn hospital bag the way a customs officer scans luggage. "The neurologist has already been. We've arranged for a private care team. You don't need to, I'm a doctor," I said. She smiled. The particular smile that said, "I know what you are." "Of course," she said. "Come in." Simone was in the kitchen, on her phone, feet tucked under her on the window seat. She looked up, gave me a small wave that contained every year of our particular dynamic, and went back to her call. Lily wasn't there. I found out later she was at a spa in Scottsdale, having been deemed too emotionally fragile to handle the situation directly. No one had used that same calculus on me. I went upstairs alone. My father was propped against 3 pillows, the machines beside him quiet and steady. He'd aged in a way I hadn't prepared myself for. Or maybe it was just that the performance was stripped away. Without an audience, he looked like what he was, a 71-year-old man who was tired. He opened his eyes when I came in. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he lifted his hand, just slightly, toward me. The left side of his face had dropped, his right hand was stronger. "I took it, Elliot," he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered. "I'm here," I said. That was all we managed that first day. But he didn't let go of my hand for a long time. Over the next 10 days, I became the de facto medical coordinator of his care. Not because anyone asked me to. Because no one else in that house knew the difference between a transient ischemic attack and a hemorrhagic stroke, or understood what the discharge planner was actually saying when she used words like cognitive rehabilitation and modified diet protocol. Renee nodded along in every meeting and then made decisions based on what sounded most manageable for her schedule. I intervened 3 times in the first week. Once when the overnight aide misread the medication chart. Once when a physical therapist pushed him too hard and his blood pressure spiked. Once when Renee, in a phone call I wasn't meant to overhear, described my presence to someone as hovering. "She means well," she said to whoever was on the line. "She's just very intense. It's the doctor thing. They all think they know best." I was in the hallway. I kept walking. Simone found me in the kitchen that evening making tea. I wasn't going to drink. She sat down across from me like she had something to say and then spent a while not saying it. "Mom's just stressed," she said finally. "I know." She doesn't mean it as a criticism. I looked at her. Simone was not a bad person. She was a person who had grown up being told that keeping the peace was the same as being good. I didn't hold it against her. I just also wasn't going to pretend. "I know that too," I said. She left before the tea finished steeping. On day 9, my father had a good afternoon. He was alert, speech clearer, the left side weakness beginning to show small signs of improvement. I sat with him while Renee was at a garden committee meeting, because apparently that still happened, and we talked. Actually talked. He asked about my work. I told him about a case, an 18-year-old who'd come in after a climbing accident who I'd gotten back. He listened in a way he hadn't when I was young, when listening was always interrupted by something more important. Then he said quietly, "I wasn't very good at this." I didn't pretend not to know what he meant. "No," I said, "you weren't." He nodded slowly. "Your mother would have been better." A pause. "She always knew what you needed before you asked." That was the most he'd ever said about her to me in 23 years. I held it carefully, like something that might break if I moved too fast. "She would have liked what I turned out to be," I said. "Yes," he said, "she would have." The envelope arrived 11 days after I got there, delivered by a courier to the front door, addressed to Simone Hayes Porter and Lily Hayes Porter, C/O Renee Porter Hayes, which is what my stepmother had changed her name to, a hyphenated architecture that placed her daughters first. My name was not on the envelope. I wasn't in the room when Renee opened it. I found out what was in it the same way I'd found out about most things in that family, the hard way after the fact. It was a letter from my father's personal attorney, a man named Prescott Carroll, formally informing the household that Gerald Hayes had revised his estate documents 8 months prior. The primary residence and investment accounts, around $2.3 million, would go to Renee, the charitable trust and congressional archive would pass to a foundation, and I, Elliot Hayes, his only biological child, would receive a conditional inheritance of $40,000, contingent on completion of a mental health evaluation and certification of fitness by a physician of the family's choosing. $40,000, conditional. I was a doctor. I had student loan debt that made that number feel like a bad joke. But the money wasn't the point. The point was the condition. The point was that they had decided in writing with a lawyer's signature that I was the unstable one, that my presence needed to be evaluated and approved before I could receive what was mine by right and by blood. Renee told me at dinner, carefully, with the expression of someone who had rehearsed it. It was your father's decision, she said. We all just want to make sure you're getting the support you need. You work so hard, Elliot. It's not a judgment, it's care. Simone stared at her plate. I set down my fork and looked at Renee across the table. Which physician? I said. We thought Dr. Harrington. He's been your family doctor for 15 years. I said. He's not impartial. Elliot. I'll be leaving in the morning, I said. I'll be in touch through my own attorney. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room that had never actually been mine, and called the only person I trusted without hesitation. Her name was June O'Coffer Bell. We'd been friends since first year of med school, when she'd sat next to me in biochem, and lent me her notes without being asked. She was now a family law attorney in Chicago, having made the pivot after her own family's estate implosion. And she was exactly the kind of person you wanted in your corner, methodical, unsentimental, and furious on your behalf in a way that never clouded her judgment. Tell me everything, she said. I did. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the condition is almost certainly unenforceable if your father's mental capacity at the time of signing is in question. And given the timing 8 months ago before the stroke, but after what sounds like an extended period of undue influence, we have something to work with. I don't want to drag him through a legal battle, I said. I know, she said, but Elliot, they already started it. I went back to Denver. I worked my shifts. I answered June's emails and signed the documents she sent and tried to treat the whole thing like a problem that belonged to someone slightly outside myself. That's how I got through hard things. You observe them from a careful distance until you figure out what they actually require. What I didn't tell June, what I didn't tell anyone, was that 2 weeks before I'd left Colorado Springs, I'd found something. I'd been looking for my father's advance directive, which no one in that house seemed to know the location of, in his study. The study was the one room in the house that still smelled like him. Cedar and old paper, and the particular staleness of rooms that belonged to people who spend most of their time elsewhere. His desk was organized in a way I recognized, not Renee's organization, his own. Labels in his handwriting, folders arranged by category. I found the advance directive in the second drawer, but in the back of the same drawer, behind a row of hanging files, was a manila envelope. Unsealed, my name typed on the front, not handwritten, typed like it had been prepared with some formality. Inside was a letter. 2 pages, single-spaced, his signature at the bottom. I stood there in his study and read it twice. It wasn't a will or a legal document. It was, as best as I can describe it, an accounting. A record of things he had observed and not said. My medical school graduation speech, which he'd watched on a recording even though he'd been there in person, because he wanted to listen to it again without the noise of the crowd. A newspaper clipping about a mass casualty event at a concert in Denver 18 months ago, where the ER team response had been cited in a state medical journal. He'd circled my name in ink. There was a paragraph near the end that I keep coming back to. I was not a present father. I know this. I told myself for a long time that the way I provided was enough, that the work I did mattered in a way that made up for other things. I don't believe that anymore. What I believe now is that Elliot learned to rely on herself because I failed to be reliable, and she became someone extraordinary in spite of that, not because of it. I would like her to know that I see that. I would like her to know that I see that. I would like her to know that I see her. He'd also included a separate sealed document, a letter to Prescott Carroll, his attorney, written in his own hand, instructing that in the event of his incapacity or death, a rider to his existing will was to be filed, revoking the conditional clause and ensuring equal distribution of the estate between myself and any other designated heirs. The letter was dated 7 months ago. 1 month before the revised will that Renee had presented at dinner, I took photos of everything. I put the envelope back exactly where I'd found it. And I called June that night. He tried to fix it, I said. She was quiet for 3 seconds, which for June is a long time. Elliot, she said, they may not have known that letter existed. Or they did, I said. And they made sure it never made it to the attorney. The hearing was set for a Thursday in April. Denver had one of those spring mornings that couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter. Sky low and gray, a thin crest of snow from the night before already melting off the sidewalks. June had filed a petition to contest the conditional clause on grounds of undue influence and conflicting testamentary intent. We had the letter from the study. We had a timeline showing that the revised will had been signed 11 months after my father's first documented episode of what his primary care physician had recorded as possible early cognitive changes. We had 3 emails from Renee to the estate attorney in which she referenced her desire to streamline the inheritance structure before my father's health situation became complicated. Renee had hired a firm from Denver's Cherry Creek neighborhood, expensive and polished, the kind of firm that relied on intimidation before evidence. I wore my hospital badge clipped to my blazer, not out of arrogance, because I needed to remember who I was when the room started trying to tell me otherwise. June and I arrived early. The building was glass and gray granite, the kind of civic architecture that's designed to feel unwinnable. We took the elevator to the 4th floor and sat down at our side of the conference table. The mediation room smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. Renee came in with her attorney, a man named Griffith, and Simone. Lily was, again, not present. I noticed Simone looked like she hadn't slept. Griffith opened with the standard sequence: my father's expressed wishes, the legally executed documents, the framing of the mental health clause as a protective measure. He said the word concern 7 times in 4 minutes. He had the smooth delivery of a man who had argued things he knew were wrong for long enough that he'd stopped noticing the difference. June let him finish. Then she said, "We'd like to introduce Exhibit A." She placed copies of my father's letter on the table. The original was already with the court. I watched Renee's face as she read the first paragraph. Nothing moved in her expression. That, more than anything, told me she'd known it existed. Griffith recovered quickly. "A private letter carries no legal weight without formal filing. The executed will stands as the executed will," June said, "was signed 11 months after Dr. Arsh Tarani, your client's own primary care physician, documented cognitive concerns in a medical record your client's team failed to disclose during discovery." She set another document on the table. "We have that record. We also have the attorney's correspondence logs showing that Renee Hayes Porter contacted Prescott Carroll's office 4 times in the 6 weeks before the will was revised. We have those emails." Griffith looked at Renee. Renee looked at the table. Simone looked at me for the first time all morning. There was a long pause. "We'd like to request a recess," Griffith said. June said, "Of course." During the recess, I stood at the window at the end of the hall and looked out over the parking lot. The snow was almost gone by then. A parking attendant in a yellow vest was eating a sandwich on the hood of a car and looking at his phone, entirely unbothered by whatever was happening inside. I thought about the night my father told me not to call him anymore. During my sophomore year of college, after I'd missed a family fundraiser to cover an extra shift. I thought about the Christmas I worked a double so I wouldn't have to drive to Colorado Springs and sit at a table where no one asked me anything except whether I was seeing anyone. I thought about all the versions of myself I packed away over the years, the ones that needed too much, the ones that were too loud, too inconvenient, too present. June appeared at my shoulder. "They're offering full reinstatement," she said quietly. "Conditional clause struck. Equal share. And the letter? They want it kept out of any public filing." I turned to look at her. She already knew my answer. "No," I said. "The letter goes in." She nodded once. "That's what I told them you'd say." We went back in. Renee didn't speak to me after the ruling. She gathered her things with the same controlled precision she brought to every performance and walked out without looking back. I wasn't surprised. I had not expected an apology. I had stopped expecting apologies from that family a long time ago. Simone caught up with me in the elevator lobby. "Elliot," she said. I waited. She looked like she wanted to say several things and was trying to choose between them. Finally, she said, "I didn't know about the letter. In the study, I want you to know that." I looked at her for a moment. I believed her for a moment. Simone had many flaws, but deliberate cruelty wasn't one of them. She'd been managed as surely as I had, just in a different direction. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," she said. She gestured vaguely at the air between us, at 11 years of carefully maintained distance. "For all of it." I nodded. I didn't hug her. I wasn't there yet. But I didn't walk away either. And for us, that was something new. My father died 6 weeks after the mediation. He never regained full speech. But the week before, he had a clear afternoon, and I drove down to sit with him. Renee was out. It was just me and the day nurse, a steady woman named Deb who always had peppermints in her pocket and understood without being told when to give people privacy. He couldn't say much, but he could track a conversation, and he could communicate with his eyes in a way I'd learned to read over those months. I told him I'd found the letter. I told him I knew what he'd tried to do. He held my gaze for a long time. Then he made a sound that was somewhere between relief and sorrow, the sound of a man who understood that things had been set right but too slowly, that the cost of too slowly is something you don't get to take back. I took his hand. You saw me, I said. I know you saw me, I said. I know you saw me. He blinked, slow and deliberate. Yes, I stayed until the light outside shifted to the long orange of late afternoon. I drove back to Denver with the heat on and the radio off and let the miles do what miles do. Spring in Colorado takes its time. The mountains hold snow well into April, and even in the city, you'll get a cold snap in March that makes you doubt everything. But by May, the light comes back in a way that feels personal, like it specifically decided to return for you. I kept my shifts at Mercy General. I kept my apartment in Capitol Hill with its unreliable radiator in good natural light and the coffee shop downstairs where the owner still misspells my name on the cup. I took the money from my father's estate and put most of it into a scholarship fund at my undergraduate alma mater for students working their way through school. I kept enough to pay off the last of my loans. For the first time since I was 22, I had a number in my bank account that didn't make my chest tight. The house in Broadmoor went to Renee as specified. I didn't contest that. It was her home in a way it had never been mine. And I had no interest in living there. What I took from that house, at Simone's urging, was a small box of things she'd found in a back closet, a photo of my mother and father on their wedding day, a report card from second grade with a note my teacher had written in the margin, and a fishing rod that my father had bought for me when I was 7, the summer before my mother got sick, when we drove up to Grand Lake for a week and everything was still, briefly, exactly as it should have been. I hung the photo on my wall. Next to it, I put my medical school diploma and a drawing made by the daughter of one of my patients, a 6-year-old who'd spent 3 days in the ER after a car accident and, on the day she was discharged, handed me a crayon portrait of a doctor with very large hands saving the world. That wall, in my apartment, in a life I built myself, is the truest record of who I am. June came to Denver in June. Her first name and her birth month being a coincidence she's long since stopped finding funny. And we had dinner at a place in Rhino with exposed brick and very good wine, and I told her that I still wasn't sure I'd processed any of it. She said that was fine. She said processing was overrated as a timeline and that what mattered more was what you did next. What I did next was go to work on a Monday morning and take a 12-year-old with a ruptured appendix from the waiting room to the OR in under 8 minutes, and stand in the hallway afterward with my hands still and my mind clear, doing the thing I trained for, the thing I chose, the thing that belongs entirely to me. I didn't come from the family I needed. I think a lot of people know that particular ache, the way it sits in you, quiet and permanent, alongside all the other things you carry. But somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting for permission to take up space in my own story. My father saw me. In the end, late and imperfect, and not enough to undo what had already been done, he saw me. I hold that alongside everything else, not as redemption, not as resolution, just as true, and I am still here, still showing up, still the doctor who stays in the room when things get hard. That, I've decided, is more than enough. I've been thinking a lot lately about cause and effect, not in a dramatic way, not in the way people talk about karma like it's a vending machine that eventually spits out what you're owed, just the quieter version of it, the way the choices people make, over years accumulate into a shape, the shape of who they become, the shape of what they lose. Renee spent 11 years building a version of our family that had no room for me in it, not with cruelty that announces itself, but with the slow, patient kind, the kind that works through omission and arrangement and the careful management of who gets to be seen. She was good at it, efficient, and for a long time, it worked. I shrank. I adapted. I built my life somewhere else and told myself that was fine. But here's what I've come to understand. When you build something on a foundation of exclusion, you are also, quietly, building its undoing. Every time Renee made a decision that prioritized control over truth, she was adding to a record. Every email to the attorney, every meeting with Griffiths, Every dinner where the word concern was used to dress up something that was really just greed. It accumulated. And in the end, it was exactly that accumulation, her own paper trail, her own pattern, that unraveled everything she'd constructed. That's not justice handed down from somewhere above. That's just what happens when a person chooses convenience over integrity, repeatedly, for long enough. The structure eventually shows its cracks. And my father. I've sat with his choices for a long time now. He was not a simple person to forgive, and I'm not going to pretend I've arrived somewhere clean and resolved about it. But what I do believe is that his decision, late and imperfect as it was, to write that letter, to put it in the drawer with my name on it, to try to set the record straight before it was too late, that came from something. From whatever part of him had watched me grow up and quietly kept track. Intelligence without courage is just observation. But he found it, at the end. He used what he had left to do what he could. That matters, even when it also isn't enough. What I keep coming back to, for myself, is this. I did not stay in that fight because I was angry, though I was. I stayed because walking away would have been a kind of agreement. An agreement that the version of me they'd constructed, unstable, undeserving, too much and not enough, was accurate. And I knew, with the particular certainty that comes from having built your own life from scratch, that it wasn't. That's what I want to say to anyone who recognizes something of their own story in mine. Not that you'll win. Not that the people who underestimated you will eventually see. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes there is no letter in the drawer. What I want to say is, your persistence in becoming yourself fully and without apology is its own kind of answer. The work you do, the integrity you keep when no one is watching, the decision to stay honest in rooms that reward performance. Those things compound too, just like the other kind does. I am still a doctor in Denver. I still take the stairs. I still show up on Monday mornings ready to do the hard thing. And I carry with me a photograph of my parents on their wedding day, a fishing rod, and a crayon portrait by a 6-year-old who thought I saved the world. That is enough. It is more than enough. It always was.